So, how do you measure progress? How does your organization measure progress? And do you think they're the same? Today, we're going to be talking about measurement, how it can be used for good, and how it can cause a lot of fear, anxiety, uncertainty, or misdirection. Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. My name is Peta Blakely. This is a 30-minute conversation with leaders of mission-based organizations about leading through uncertain times. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Coffee Time with Masterminds. My name is Peta Blakely, and I'm the founder and principal of Blakely Consulting.
Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. I am Cynthia Rojas, founder and principal of To Your Growth.
Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. I'm Rebecca Tuttle, founder and principal of Grant Right Now and Grant Writing for Good.
I'm Peta Blakely. I'm the founder and principal of Blakely Consulting. I am joined today by my co-host, Cynthia Rojas, the founder and principal of To Your Growth. And Rebecca Tuttle is not with us today. Today we are talking about measurement, how it can be useful in an organization, how it can be terrifying in an organization. Cynthia, you've got a lot of experience with all different kinds of measurement, both in terms of evaluation, right? Process management and performance management. Can you help us clarify some of those terms?
Well, I have to tell you, I'm very excited about this topic. One, organizations struggle in this area way too much, and it could really impact your ability to generate funding or increase revenue. So it's a really important topic. And I know, Peter, you can talk about it forever, right? Because there are a lot of nuances. There are a lot of nuances. And I love that you named the show Measurement for Good, because that's what it should be. And I hear all the time that organizations want to be learning organizations. And that's a very specific kind of culture that requires using the information that you have, the knowledge that you have, to improve your practice or to sustain good practices. But that takes work. And so it's great to have that aspiration, but it's hard work. And so your question is, what are the differences between organization measurement, employee measurement, and all that good stuff? I'm going to turn that to you because I think that's a good question, and you'll probably do a better job at answering that. You like that, right?
Well, you like that. That was good, Cynthia. Okay, here's one of the things that I see. It is sometimes easier to measure and count whether employees are doing an aspect of their job description than it is to really measure the impact of the entire system, right? Yeah. It's a little bit closer, right? That creates a situation where it's placing the burden on employees, and it's creating measures that aren't necessarily connected to something bigger, right? Mm-hmm. And it feels like it's punitive. It feels like you're just going to get in trouble if you're not hitting this metric, as opposed to being connected to a really important goal. I like the term WIG, wildly important goal, that the entire organization is aiming towards, right? So measures for the organization are, how many families did we help this year? Or how many young people went to college this year? As opposed to measures for the individual that might be, how many events did you host? Or how many times did you do a particular process? A big one in evaluation is the struggle about getting people to enter some data into whatever system, right? So that we know that it happened. And you get really, really focused on that. You lose sight of why we're doing it, right? What is the big organizational goal?
I'll tell you what else we lose sight on. And so that's an important point, right? Is that we lose the big picture because we're stuck on whether you're meeting your data entry requirements, which are important. That's not to say they're not important, but Another thing we lose sight on is the idea, oh, it just left my brain. I've reached that age where it just leaves my brain. Is, oh, do we have, is the organization holding itself accountable
Right.
for having the infrastructure that allows for that? Right. So I know
Right.
organizations that are holding their employees accountable to do tasks, but the infrastructure is not there. Right. They don't
Yep.
have the best computer, or for some reason in their organization, in their building, the internet is always down. You
Mhm.
can't, you really have to, this is why I love this. You have to look at it together as opposed to in isolation. Why is it easier to just focus on the employee, Peter? What do you think that happens?
Why? For the same reason that it's easier to focus on the client or the program participant, right? It makes us feel better. It lets us off the hook. If I
Mm,
said, I have, if I'm the leader of an organization and I say, we as an organization have a wildly important goal of tracking every interaction. And this is really important because it has implications for fundraising and it has implications for making sure we're resourced correctly, right? And it's really wildly important. And I just say, okay, staff, you've got to type in case notes. I am really giving myself the easy way out, right? I am not confronting the fact that, one, I hired these people because they are really great at building relationships and they love to hang out with young people and build really great, trusting, long-term relationships. And I did not hire them because they can type or use technology, right? I'm letting myself off the hook for the fact that they're maybe out in the community all the time and they do their jobs off their cell phones. And I'm not holding myself accountable for investing in a data system that they could access on their phones, right? I'm asking them to go back to the office and use a laptop that they might not even have a laptop, right? They might not know how to use it. I'm letting myself off the hook for fundraising to just make the internet in their building be better, right?
Right.
So by looking at it as a personal failure, I am really reducing this to a very, very simple problem, when in fact it's possible that everybody in the organization has some responsibility about addressing this problem, and that its root causes are a lot more complicated than what it looks like. And this is exactly the same thing that we do when we look at our program and we say attendance isn't very good, the young people aren't attending our program. And then instead of asking ourselves well, geez, young people are really good at getting their needs met. So how is it that attending this program is not meeting their needs, right?
Right.
Or, gosh, maybe we need to dig into this and understand whether these people have transportation barriers and we need to sit down with the public transportation agency and get them bus vouchers, right? Maybe this problem is a whole lot more complicated than, yeah, well, they're young people, they're just not very responsible, right?
Yeah. I can't, you're bringing up, it reminds me of a conversation I had a while ago where there is an organization that is struggling in meeting the needs of the population, in that they don't think the people that they should be serving or could be serving are coming through their doors. And they don't know what to do about that. But what's interesting is that when I was talking with them, they talked about all the potential barriers that they think are happening. Transportation, childcare, all these things. And what was not mentioned was, no one said, well, as an organization, we explored our customer service to see if people want to come to us. Or we thought about maybe we need to go to them. And this idea of people coming to our institution is just so 2019.
Yep.
Right. And so it's interesting because it wasn't until you worked on this topic that I realized, wow, this happens more than I think many of us realize. And it really starts with us, the institution.
Yeah. And it's, and I think this gets to the root of, when is measurement good, right?
Yeah.
When are you doing it well? is when it leads us into this much more complicated conversation about how we can actually make a measure better, right? Your first idea, your initial response is probably not right, only because, like you said, that's so 2019. All the easy solutions have been tried, right?
Right.
And all the easy problems have been solved.
Right.
So whatever your obstacle is, you're probably going to have to think a little bit deeper, right? You're going to spend a little bit more time on it. But that's also the opportunity to have everybody in your organization understand what that goal is, why it's really, really important, and understand that every single person in the organization has some responsibility towards attaining that goal, right? So, is it your physical plant people who make your building look friendlier and also be more accessible? Is it your reception desk who might change the way they operate to be more welcoming? Is it somebody in HR who has to make sure that they hire more people who speak different languages for different roles, right? Every single person in the organization probably does have a role to play in addressing this.
Yeah. And so many times we fall into really staying focused in our lane and not seeing the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And that becomes a really painful point. There are two evaluation models that I know I use, and I know you are familiar with them. There are many more, but one of them is results-based accountability,
Yeah.
and also known as RBA. And I loved when I learned that model, what is probably 10 years from now, I loved it instantly because there's a measure that holds the organization accountable. It's called the effort measure. Are we, doing what we said as an institution that we said we would do? Do we have the infrastructure? Do we have the things in place? And the logic model is another model that allows a space for inputs. The
Yeah.
thing about the logic model, though, that the input section feels very technical. I'm going to put these 10 things.
Mhm.
And that's not where we tend to focus.
Right.
Once we get through the whole logic model, we tend to stay on the right side of it, right?
Yep.
And we tend to ignore the left.
I'd say the big mistake we make is we start with the activities.
Yep.
Because that's what you're doing and that's what seems really important to you. And that's the wrong place to start. Right?
Yeah.
Start at the ends.
Yeah. Yeah. And so with RBA, the efforts put in, the supports put in through the organization is in the center of the model, right? It's the middle part. And so for me, it speaks about how important that part is. And we tend to forget. And so we do it all the time. And so as leaders, how do you then hold your leadership team accountable, who are probably exhausted, are probably handling day-to-day stuff, especially during these times, or have a huge responsibility? How do we also hold them accountable?
And how do we hold ourselves accountable for supporting everybody in the organization? Right.
Yes.
I mean, this comes back around to our conversation about structural care.
Mm-hmm.
Do we as an organization have a goal around keeping our staff well, right?
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. And then this also leads and I think we're going to have an entire topic on creating safe spaces. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be in the episode where we talk about becoming a learning organization. And we had a knowledge management expert on the show several months ago. And he said something that has resonated with me since. He said, knowledge is an organization's greatest asset.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not mining your data, right, on all levels, on the organization level, on the client level, and on your employee level, and using it to improve your practice, right, and to have conversations, one, you're not a learning organization, but two, you're making vulnerable the most important asset you have, and that's your knowledge.
Hmm.
And nonprofits just have
Yep.
an enormous amount of knowledge. I've never worked
Yep.
with a nonprofit that was not an expert in what they did. I know that sounds funny, but they really know their stuff. They really do.
Hmm. Yes, but they have a hard time learning from it.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and they have a hard time. I mean, I'm speaking generalizations now. They have hard time taking knowledge, which is often held at the person level, and extending it across the organization.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pressure. I once had this situation, oh wow, it was a really long time ago, where we were serving a population that where their length of stay in the intervention was twice as long as everybody else. And we really needed to explore why this was happening, because what it was causing was this extreme backlog and this long wait list of people needing to get services.
Mm.
And so we went out to the people. We started doing focus groups and interviews and things of that nature, and asking them, right, why do they think they were with us for so much longer? And you know what came out of that? I would have never guessed it. They found our space to be a safe haven,
Mhm.
and they didn't want to go anyplace else. This is a population that fears being deported. And so
Oh.
they see every institution as a potential government institution. Even the library, they talked about they don't go to the library. So what they were doing is that they were staying with us as long as they could, because we continued to help them. We were not, their status was
Mhm.
not important to us. It really was about helping them. And once we identified that, we were able to build support services that moved them along
Right.
and helped us serve those on the wait list. Oh my God, it was like, it was amazing how this happened. This was such a pain point for the organization for years. And then, one day we looked at each other and said, well, let's talk to the people.
It's
Not
amazing
make
how long it takes us to just ask the people, right?
Right. And
Yes.
so when the organization took responsibility, right, and said, we have to see what we're doing that's causing this,
Mhm.
and then be willing to change, we were
Right.
able to open the gates and serve more people.
Right. And potentially serve those people better. Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, because
Yeah.
we created lower levels of care, right?
Right.
Because they were done, but what we did was that we focused on building community, on
Mhm.
teaching them safety, on helping them understand what's the difference between a library and a police department or a
Yeah.
state department, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. I want to come back to the idea of responsibility, because I think there has long been a sort of false dichotomy between the for-profit and the not-for-profit industries,
Mhm.
where people assume that not-for-profits are doing good and important work and for-profits are just only making money. And I don't think that that's true anymore. First of all, it was always just a tax designation. It wasn't really about how you run your organization. But consumers are no longer tolerating for-profit businesses that have no social or environmental responsibility. Not-for-profits are starting to have to take on responsibility for things even outside of their field, right? So housing agencies now have environmental responsibility, and there's some back and forth there. But I also think that not-for-profits have a responsibility to think about their financial sustainability in a way that they have not always done, and that what the for-profit industry calls the triple bottom line approach is relevant to all kinds of organizations in different ways.
Tell us what's that triple line approach?
The triple bottom line approach is one way of thinking about how for-profits should be tracking their old-fashioned bottom line, which is just profit, as well as their social impact and their environmental impact, and that they should be managing to all of those things, not just profits.
I ask because I know that there are many nonprofits who also do social enterprises.
Right.
And so there are nonprofits that have a for-profit component to them.
Yep.
And we often refer to that as the double bottom line, which is interesting because the shift that has to happen.
Right.
And so so now there's a triple.
Yeah, right.
Make a bet it'll be a quad.
This was an easier, I think in some ways, this was an easier shift for the for-profit industry to make because they had always had what I call a wildly important goal, right? They had always had one central metric that everybody in the organization was contributing to, right? And that was profit.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways that makes it easier to manage, simpler in any way, not necessarily easier. The not-for-profit industry can learn from that, right? There is some real power in the simplicity of having one central measure, 3 maximum.
Yeah.
You know, we tend to want to measure everything, right? We look at, everything in our logic model as being equally important, or we prioritize the things that are easier to measure as opposed to the things that are the most important in terms of driving our work.
Mm-hmm.
And that leads to confusion, to different people in the organization sort of working towards different measures. There is real power in having a very small number of really important, wildly important goals or central measures.
I was going to ask you about that because, I mean, you and I are not in the business of making things more complicated for nonprofits. I think our passion leads in our work in that we really want things to be simplified and useful. What do you have an example or in terms of leaders, how can they simplify this? Because now what we're saying can potentially be anxiety provoking, right?
Right.
We're like, another measure, I'm never listening to that show again.
It's better. It's more powerful. Here is a process that I would use if I was going to do it. Is that I would actually bring the organization together and work together to identify one measure that if this is moving in the right direction, we're all confident that we are addressing the problem that our organization exists to address. Let me say that again. If this measure is moving in the right direction, our organization is addressing the issue that we exist to address. Now, it does not have to be perfect. No measure actually reflects everybody's lived experience. But there's one thing that if it's tracked in the right direction, we pretty much think we're making progress here, right? And here's the beauty of that, and the beauty of doing it with everybody involved is now we have something that we can all keep our eye on as an organization and say, I know how to use this measure to tell my organization's story. I know how to use this measure in development, in communicating with organizational partners. I know how what I do every day contributes to this measure. And we've all agreed in advance that this measure is really important and central to our mission. So when it's not headed in the right direction, we know how to stop and have a conversation and say, how can we work together to make this better, right? This is really important, and we know it's going to be hard, but we have to make it better because this is what we're holding ourselves accountable to. When you have many different measures, it can just lead to extra confusion and it can lead to extra work. So you have those people that are super measure resistant. How can we have them reporting on one thing instead of 12? Wouldn't that help, right? It's hard to communicate around 12 measures. It's easier to just, sing out of one hymnal and have everybody talking about the same measure and the importance of moving it in the same direction and problem solving about that specific measure, right? And you might find that when you establish a priority like that, that you can get better compliance around the tasks that go to being able to support that measure. So, you need people to report on every client that they meet with or something like that. Because they know that data point goes to that big central measure and they're going to hear about it all the time and they want it to be right? Mm-hmm. They know it contributes to an important conversation. So, it's going to take a little bit of discipline. It's going to take making some hard choices about deciding what measures might be secondary. And it's really going to require you to do some real soul searching about whether you're actually set up to move that thing. Mm-hmm. It's also going to make you ask some tough questions about how do we contribute to this thing? And are all of the activities going on in this space actually driving this measure in the right way? Right. Are we allocating our resources appropriately? But it's going to simplify things, right?
Yeah. I was thinking as you were speaking that we should have 2 people on the show. So mm-hmm. we've been on leadership teams and they're interesting, right? And some of them have tension, right? Mm-hmm. Because we're all people. And so again, we're all focused on our lane. And if you don't have a culture that really sees the bigger picture or really sees how we're all interconnected, then you struggle in that area. That one goal you talked about that brings everyone together.
Right.
Then we could bring a guest where it's done really well. It would be really interesting to see what does it take for an organization to buy into a goal, and how can the leaders hold it together in such a way that actually moves the goal forward, right? Because again, save space. We have to have a conversation. If there's a hiccup, if there's an issue, I have to be able to say that I'm having these struggles without shame. And so I think that would be an interesting conversation, because I'm sitting here thinking, wow, how do we do this, mm-hmm. right? In a way that is simple, impactful, and actually brings people together.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's that is another advantage to picking a higher level. Maybe higher level isn't the right term because it's not necessarily a goal that is an aggregate of other goals, right? I don't want to give that impression. But focusing on something that is complex and long-term and acknowledging that it's complex and long-term, I think can make those conversations less personal, right?
Yeah. I also, this is going to be controversial. How many minutes we have? I also find in some nonprofit organizations that, and she put me on camera by myself. I love it. That there are 2 functional units primarily within an organization. One functional unit is the unit in which the services and programming happens. And the other functional unit is the operations side. You need both in a healthy organization. You exist as a nonprofit because you deliver this programming. The operations side supports the programming to happen. So let me give you a concrete example. You have a finance team which supports the ability for the program staff to do what they need to do with the population that they're serving. You have an HR team. So these are all operations. What I find sometimes is because the operational unit, the functional unit that we call operations usually requires highly specialized skill sets. Programming for some organizations allow lived experience, does not always require college education. Many organizations prefer the experience over the college academic experience. And what we find is an imbalance, right? And then the operational unit starts to, they almost run the organization and forget that they exist because of the
So the
program.
service can happen.
Yeah. So the program side gets held accountable, right? And there's a lot of finger pointing.
Right.
And the operation side just gets to do whatever. Well, not
So
whatever.
what would it look like if the operations side had logic models where their target population is the staff doing the work?
Yeah. That's their consumer. Yes.
Yeah. Right. So, you know, the IT department would be like, what percentage of the time are people's tools available when they need them, right? The HR department would be rated on the employee's ability to do their work and stay healthy. You know, I think that is completely possible.
Yeah.
And
I think we should do it. I think we should start a business, logic models for operational units. Stay tuned.
You know, I think it makes complete sense.
I think so. I think so. This whole idea of if you break down organizations by units, you see it differently, and then you assess the culture. And I'm just finding that the culture is reverse. Right? Yeah. And there's a lot of
your point about like specialized skills and degrees.
Yeah.
Being valued in operations is so interesting and well taken. Yeah. I think that is really important, and just and can lead to some kind of misunderstandings.
Oh, yeah.
I also think, you know, maybe the staff doing the work don't realize how important it is.
Right. Oh, yeah.
You know, and aren't demanding the right support. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. We are way over our time. Obviously, you and I can talk about this forever.
And we are going to be talking about measurement, targets, and learning over the next few weeks.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to it.
Me too. And I'm going to see if I find two people, one where it's working really well and one where they're struggling, so we can all learn together.
All right. So if you are that organization, either you're having a struggle and you're willing to come on and talk to us about it, or you had that struggle and you have a great case study to share with us, please let us know in the comments. We'd love to invite you on.
Yeah.
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Take care.